Okay, the next item is the Auckland Transport Draft Statement of Intent. So Trudy from Auckland Council is going to come up and introduce, I believe, Richard Leggett, who probably needs no introduction, is the chair of Auckland Transport. This is to hear from the AT board and receive their draft SOI, and the purpose for us is to enable us to question Richard. And just note that we will be approving our formal comments in May. So this is about asking where we've got to and hearing from Richard as the chair of the board. So welcome.
Tēnā te koutou katoa. We have Chair Richard Leggett here today to present Auckland Transport Draft Statement of Intent for 2025 to 2028. The Mayor issued letters of expectations to CCOs earlier this year. This was slightly later than in previous years because it allowed time for the governing body to make decisions on CCO reform in December. And following this, expectations for Auckland Transport were approved by this committee in February. Council set both expectations common to all CCOs and those specific to Auckland Transport. So after today, the next steps will be a workshop between this committee and the CCO Direction and Oversight Committee to discuss proposed shareholder comments on the draft draft statements of intent from CCOs, and then we'll be coming back to this committee in May seeking your approval of the shareholder comments on the AT draft SOI. So with that, I'll hand over and welcome Richard.
Tēnā koutou councillors. So I've got probably 5 minutes of chat, Andy. First up is to acknowledge this is our key document, agreeing with Council what AT deliver over the course of the coming year and the specific targets. As the introduction to our SOI states, we are preparing for tomorrow while delivering for today. The focus of the board and senior management is to continue a very solid delivery performance against the SOI and in areas where we have fallen short to improve. Last year, as you know, we met or exceeded 18 of our 19 KPIs. The previous 2 letters of expectation have required changes and improvements in AT's performance and approach, and I believe in many cases we are achieving those desired improvements. Examples being capital spend, local board engagement, increasingly optimising the transport network. This year's letter of expectation again states the requirement for AT to deliver on Council's priorities through agreed KPIs, but also to prepare for changes in our role and responsibilities. That preparation is underway, and feedback from Council is that we are collaborating well with Council executives on preparing the options analysis for Auckland Transport Mark II. I'll come back to this area, but as noted already, the KPIs in this SOI are prepared under the current legislation. Actually, it wasn't mentioned. So just to be very clear, that the KPIs in this SOI are prepared under current legislation, which is what the board and the management of Auckland Transport are legally required to follow. In terms of our KPIs and deliverables, we've divided these into 6 key focus areas, and they are making every interaction count, improving network productivity, taking PT from good to great, delivering value for money, effective governance and advocacy, and core business and other activities. The 24 KPIs and 37 deliverables are listed under these focus areas. And it's worth noting our KPIs and deliverables are pretty consistent with the previous 2 years, so there shouldn't be any surprises. A couple to note though, because we're unsure of where public transport patronage will land this year, we've provided a range in the draft for public transport patronage. And that will also impact on the on farebox or the revenue recognition. So the PT patronage number will be finalised with Council Executive ahead of the date for the final approval of the SOI. We are also refining the measures we use to ensure they reflect what you as Council want to know. In this area, there's a question as to whether we use farebox recovery or private revenue ratio. And again, our executive will work with your executive, and then elected officials, your councillors will decide what is the measure you want. And we're also considering whether listening and response is the right measure to use for AT's public reputation. We're considering a customer perception measure that better reflects AT's ability to respond to what matters most to Aucklanders. The other change we're proposing is to replace the previously used transport emissions reduction number with the increase in the number of electric buses. We now do not think we should use the emissions reduction measure because of a lack of reliability around verifying transport emissions, and Audit New Zealand has told us that if we use that measure, transport and PT emissions reduction, it will likely result in a qualified audit. And we and council executives do not want us to risk a qualified audit. So just to make another couple of points on that, I mean, we are committed to PT emissions and overall transport emission reduction targets. These targets are currently, were in last year's SOI and are currently in council's long-term plan, and we propose that they remain in council's long-term plan. The issue for Auckland Transport is because of an accounting quirk. Audit New Zealand have indicated that the targets in Auckland Transport's SOI will likely need to be audited, whereas we understand those targets in the council's long-term plan do not need to be audited. We will continue to report on emissions reduction, so you will still, as councillors, see what is happening in that area. We are just proposing that it comes out of the statement of intent. While we're relatively confident the KPIs that we have listed and the targets are achievable, they require an effective and motivated staff. With any change, there is uncertainty, but the lack of clarity on Auckland Transport Mark II will be responsible for, that we will be responsible for, and the consequent impact on people's jobs is taking its toll. We've recently lost 2 staff who work closely with the board, and both cited uncertainty about the future, lack of job security as their major reason for leaving. And this brings me on to a few comments about preparing for tomorrow element of the statement of intent. As I've said, I believe we're working well with council on the future state and analysing a range of options for Auckland Transport Mark II. I think everyone's agreed the RTC and RLTP process will be changing, and Hamish Bunn, who many of you know, is leading our work with council executives on how this can be effected. We have an Auckland Transport team led by Kirstine Jones, which is working with council on the wider CCO review and looking at what can be moved ahead of legislation. We are leading into this work, but are mindful of the objective of the CCO review, which is to make sure Auckland Council Group is set up to deliver the Auckland Council long-term plan. For transport, Auckland needs a structure that can build and maintain transport assets. They are currently sitting at $28 billion and growing. We need to have a structure that is able to manage and optimise the transport network and to run a great public transport operation. These are 3 areas that are very closely interlinked. So any new structure needs to be able to manage the interdependencies inherent in the transport area. So to summarise, the SOI KPIs and deliverables respond to this year's letter of expectation and build on the past 2 years, where AT has been actively, and I think mostly effectively, responding to the demands for improved performance and greater transparency. We are working well with council executive towards an AT Mark II, but are concerned about the high level of uncertainty on our future state and the impact that is having on our staff and our ability to retain and attract talent, and therefore to continue to deliver the services to a high level of standard that you expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Someone like to move? Thank you, Morris. Second, Chris. Okay. Questions? Julie Ferry.
Kia ora, folks. Sorry if it's a bit noisy. Can you hear me? I'm at the airport. So,
Yes.
Yep. Great. Okay. So I just have 3 areas of questions on this, and acknowledging to your point about the fact that this is sort of a chance for conversation rather than we're signing it off. The one about special vehicle lanes, which includes bus lanes but isn't just bus lanes. This is page 26 of the attachment, is forecasting 10 kilometres for FY26. That doesn't seem very ambitious, particularly if it's not just bus lanes, but it's those other types of lanes as well. Are you able to expand a bit on why AT has picked such a low target? Thanks.
No, but I'm sure someone here can. Murray and Sean can come and help me on that one.
Great, thank you.
Oh, no. Who wants to come up? Yeah. So Andrew Allen will respond to that.
Great, thank you. Kia ora, Andrew.
Good morning, Councillor. Apologies, I only heard a small part of that question. Would it be terribly rude of me to ask you just to repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. So the special vehicle lanes target for FY26, page 26 in the attachments is only 10 kilometres, and that's not just bus lanes, that's a range of other special vehicle lanes as well. That doesn't seem very ambitious. Could you hear that okay? I'm sorry, there's a whole lot of announcements happening in the airport.
Yes. No, okay. No, that's great. Thank you for the question. I guess that comes down to an observation on whether or not 10 kilometres is ambitious or not. The target and what we're tracking towards this year is 5 kilometres, so it's half of the length of special vehicle lanes that we actually have in the SOR for next year. So in essence, the 10 kilometres is a doubling on what we're performing this year. And there is a huge amount of work going in. In fact, it's part of the update I was going to do a bit later as part of the AT update in terms of preparing designs and getting ready to be able to deliver against all of that. I would not be saying that delivering 10 kilometres of special vehicle lanes is a small or a low target. But I guess that's down to what others might perceive. 10 kilometres is a fairly long length against our arterial network. And of course, these bus lanes and special vehicle lanes serve a specific purpose. And where you can put them needs to be linked to where we have good volumes of buses running if they're bus lanes, and good utilisation of those bus services, rather than just putting in special vehicle lanes for the sake of putting in special vehicle lanes. So not every road lends itself to that outcome.
Okay, thanks for that. I may not still be on the call when you get to the update, but I did read it ahead of time, and I noticed that most of the information there was about dynamic lanes, which is, so it would be really helpful, maybe not right now, but afterwards, to have a breakdown of what you're forecasting around the number of the proportion of that 10 kilometres that's likely to actually be bus lanes. I don't have an issue with dynamic lanes, but it seems to me that we have gone off the boil a bit on them, and particularly that's becoming an issue across towns, and also some of the services where we don't have continuous bus lanes along the length of a route, and so they get stuck at certain points. So I'm interested in further conversation about that, but happy to take that offline, Chair, in the interest of time. That's okay. And I've got, I do also note that we did have a report from AT that indicated that putting 24/7 bus lanes on 20 key arterials would save the organisation $10 million per annum. So, yeah, that's part of the context too. My next two questions, sorry, Chair, I'll try to be as quick as I can. The removal of the emissions target, and this is on page 36 of the attachments, and the replacement of that with the low emission buses. Now, the Chair, Richard, did speak to the audit aspects of that, but are we looking at adding some other things? Because obviously low emissions buses are only a small part of the picture.
Mark Lang can answer that.
I believe thanks for the question, Councillor. I believe we're not planning to add any other measures, but I guess the key is, and if you step back for the SOI, if you're going to stand right back, we think the measure in there needs to be quantifiable, so something you can hold us to account to deliver. That for a second doesn't mean that we're not very actively looking at how do we reduce emissions, and that target we're working through obviously with Council and want to absolutely keep it it's in the long-term plan. We report against it, we'll report quarterly. And so I don't think for a second we're backing away from the target. If you kind of get into the nitty gritty of it, the problem with it is these targets are very difficult and they rely on a whole pile of information, particularly with operational emissions. The type of thing you're trying to estimate it, we're reliant on getting things like fuel data from operators, trying to estimate dead running time, so when the buses are coming to and from the depots. So that's all the kind of work we're doing underneath, and that's the sort of work that we want to report back on. And obviously, we want to absolutely reduce emissions as we can within available funding. So I guess that's how we were trying to separate it. We keep working on that, but we have a hard target that you can hold us accountable to in the SOI.
Okay, thank you. Again, probably interested in some more work in the space and how, because having that one target there for the whole climate action plan seems a bit undercooked, but let's see where we go next with that, acknowledging this is comments and questions, and we vote on it later in the year. My last question is around the DSI measure, and which is on page 37 of the attachments. I note there that you're reviewing the way that we measure safety, and I think that's good, but I'd like to see that include some stuff that's looks more broadly at people's perception of safety that then influences their transport choices as well. So things like, do parents feel that it's safe to let their children walk to school? Do people feel safe to take public transport or to be a bus driver or whatever? So I'm interested in whether that's part of your thinking. And then also having it as the absolute last measure in the statement of intent, I think is a terrible look for the organisation. And yeah, I know that they're not in order of priority, but when you put something last, it does send a message that I think you don't intend to send. So that would be another piece of it.
Yeah, point taken and very well spotted. That's easy to change, and I think to your comments, entirely justifiable that it should be moved up, even though, as you say, it's not a measure at all of importance. In terms of your first question, we are very conscious at the moment, particularly around safety of public transport, and have been doing some studies in that area, and people are feeling less safe, and we've been working with police and government and council on what we can do to improve the perception of safety. So yes, agree. I don't think I can ask Sean if we've got any other measures in the deliverables that directly relate to this.
Other than, as you mentioned, the safety on public transport, that is a particular focus. We do commit to working with the communities, especially on school responses around safety delivery. But it is too preemptive at this point to note what a future measure will entail. We don't want to rush that. We want to spend the time to get it right. And so we haven't proposed to replace it in this year's SOI.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. Appreciate the answer.
Thank you. Mayor Wayne Brown.
Right. Thank you for this. In particular, I think your chair's forward is very good and talks to the changes. But I've got this thing about speeding up the dynamic lanes and the AI signals and the TTM and the customer thing, so that if you looked at page 36, which lists how we measured, I'd like to have you at least consider temporary traffic management cone reduction of, say, 50%, 60% and 70% going to the future. You can just chew these over and think about it before we come back to our workshop. But the dynamic lanes, I thought it's quite a low number of those, 4 or 5, and I'd like to see 10, 20 and 30 over the next few years. AI signals, 10, 20 and 30. And then the customer perception thing, which is, are we listening? And it almost needs to be added into on page 19, the things that you're doing, and listening to the public should be one of them. I mean, the customer perception, you're aiming at 30%. I don't see why we shouldn't be aiming at 75%. I mean, the public transport service is pretty good. I use it regularly, and I used it late at night in the last week a couple of times, and I found it nice and cheerful and bright and quite safe, actually. The lighting inside the bus, I thought, was a very good kind of safety feeling. It was brightly lit, and you drove home. I drove home in the bus. People outside could see inside that it looked quite safe. I suppose at night, some of your buses with the darkened windows means that the people outside can't see what's going on inside. But when I went home with the light windows, I felt quite safe on it. So that was a good, very positive. So anyhow, that was my things, that TTM reduction, dynamic lane, AI signals, but in there as a measure, because those are the things we really wanted to get into, and that we've been a bit. I don't get the impression of that that's as exciting for you people as it is for me.
As you know, Mr. Mayor, one of the key focus that we as a board and I personally have been keen on is having a target of reducing journey times, and reducing journey times for the Auckland public requires improving network productivity. And so network productivity is definitely tied in with use of AI signalling, dynamic lanes, more bus lanes, as well as special vehicle, well, they are special vehicle lanes. So yes, and less disruption. So yes, we are keen on that, and we can look, and I can challenge on behalf of the board, the executive, to see whether there are areas that we can go faster on. The orange cone issue is, as you're well aware, is a challenging one. I think actually understanding how many orange cones are out there would be actually a massive target. And so having a percentage decline is going to be quite tricky to do. We need to get the utility companies, the developers, other users of the road corridor adopting the risk-based approach that only came in on the 1st of November last year, so that they don't have as many orange cones and as many disruptions. And I spoke to the chair of one of the CCOs just this week on that issue, and there's still a lack of understanding of how far you can go in reducing your TTM and still be safe. And that is one of the things that boards are concerned about. Again, we can have a look at this area to see if there's a way we can quantify a measure that is valid, and we can come back and see what we can do there.
Okay, well, thank you for that response. I know that the government has suddenly discovered orange cones as a political issue.
It's not just Auckland.
And I know, and Brooke Van Velden came out with something, and I sent her a copy of the EY report that my office commissioned, which does show that we've got a lot of cones because the legislation asks for a lot of cones. She hadn't actually had that given to her, which was a bit disappointing, but she is apparently reading it and asking some people to read it. So I have some sympathy, but I would like to see better numbers for dynamic lanes and AI signals anyhow. So thank you for that anyhow, and thank you for your opening statement, which is pretty good. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Not so sure about that blazer, but that's all right. And just remind us that Shane is going to be chairing a workshop where we are going to thrash out our response to this. So please, let's not try and get bogged down into what may or may not appear during that day, because we don't want to ruin the fun. Honey.
Thank you. Just a question in terms of Māori procurement. Correct me if I'm wrong, that you have decreased it. And just to follow on from that, if it has been, can you tell me why? Especially
No, it's steady on this year. Oh, sorry, okay.
Just to clarify on the Māori procurement, the proposal is to hold at 3%, but just to explain that it actually results in an increase year on year with Māori procurement, given that
AT budgets are forecast to be increasing year on year. In the capital space, we're currently at around 7% on average for Māori procurement, and that's predicted to grow. We are struggling in some areas of the business, particularly the public transport services, professional services, and business technology, where Māori procurement is underrepresented, but we're doing what we can to work to increase that in that part of the business. And that represents a significant portion of the budget. And just to reiterate our commitment to increasing the dollar value of Māori procurement, and that's baked into this current SOI proposal.
I'm just going to ask again, just for clarity. So it hasn't been decreased, or it is maintaining status quo without a consideration to increase?
So the proposal is to hold Māori procurement percentage-wise at 3% over the next 3 years. And that represents a dollar value increase as the budget increases.
Just in the trending up data and evidence show that there's an increase, there's a trending increase in procurement right around, or have I read that wrong?
That's correct. So over the past few years, there's been a trend upwards in Māori procurement. And this year, at a dollar value, it'll be somewhere between 70 to 80 million of the budget is going towards Māori-owned businesses.
Then it's something to actually review if you're leaving it at status quo. If the trend is that it is increasing. I don't know the finer detail behind the scene, but something to do with the workshop space. I also note around the marae that it is status quo about 1. You're going to be dealing with that too?
Yes, so the proposal on the SOI is we're holding at 1 marae turnout for the future years. We always look to try and exceed that, and I believe that this year we will be exceeding it as well. But the SOI target is you're holding at 1.
I'll definitely follow it up with through workshop delivery. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problems, Greg.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And in that, maybe if we're going to be looking at the red cones, Chair, at some future date, just understanding perhaps how the finances around that work, i.e., do people make more money by having more cones out, by renting them out and that type of thing? What are some of the motives behind it, particularly financial ones, might be helpful?
Well, I'm struggling to understand where that sits in with the SOI stuff. And so...
No, that's just your comment earlier saying that we're going to be offline in a separate discussion.
Well, no, we're having a workshop where we can talk about the SOI stuff.
So okay.
I'm not sure where your question is in regards to SOI.
Oh, maybe that's just a comment, because I'm sure I'm not the only councillor that perhaps doesn't understand that. But Richard, my specific question around, I picked up from your comments around concerns around staff retention and having a fit for purpose structure going forward, so Auckland gets the best outcomes it possibly can in its transport space. So could I just ask you, in terms of, as this CCO reform goes through its select committee processes, etc., does the board or yourself or even the chief executive have concerns about the CCO reform that they will be protesting or speaking against such a reform, or just so we understand as a collective where you may be sitting as an organisation?
No. What we agreed with and supportive of are the resolutions that were made in December 12 last year by Council around the CCO review. In particular, with specific reference to Auckland Transport, the principles of how the reform will be looked at, a broad range of options as to what the structure might look like, and a timetable of decision making. And I haven't had any direct feedback from Council Executive in terms of how progress is going, aside from the fact that I know our team, led by Christine, is working well with the Council Executive. But no, we And we also, but as a board, and as I would say a well-informed board, we would expect and have been told by council that we'll have an opportunity to input into the process, and particularly around we can give feedback on decisions that might be looking to be made.
Josephine?
Oh, it's good that I follow that question, because that is the question I was going to ask. Just picking up on your statements or what you said regarding staff motivation. And, you know, we need the staff to be motivated, to feel good about their future at Auckland Transport in order to achieve these measures in the SOI. So my question was around what certainty can be given, because you talked about it's just so much uncertainty and you've already lost high-level staff.
In any change process, there's uncertainty. So what, again, I'd say any organisation would like is for a good process to be undertaken and decisions to be made relatively quickly. Now, part of this is wrapped up in the government's legislation direction and what they say around the RCA and whether they have a view on what aspects of the RCA might be retained by AT or go into Auckland Council. So I suppose that the request from us is that, as I've just said, that the process outlined in December 12 is followed through, and the sooner we get to a good idea of what the structure will look like without necessarily the detail, the better.
Oh, thank you. And I suppose back to you, Chair, like, can those answers come through from the Council Executive?
Sorry, say that again?
You know, like he's asking about really a time frame, I think, and hearing more back from the Council Executive. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the resolutions in particular, I can't remember which resolution it was, December 12, was principles to be set out for the CCO review for Auckland Transport, options to be analysed, and a timetable to be determined. And I'm not quite sure where the Council Executive have got to on those three particular aspects.
And I think too, there's any changes are going to require a change in legislation, which is going to drive what and where and when and how. So I think we're in a bit of an uncertain time at the moment. And so, but, you know, the executive, they just need to work together. Shane?
Yes, I've got three main questions, and kind of following on from Councillor Bartley, and just wanted to drill down on that 2.5 around effective governance. And you acknowledge the CCO reform transition, outline you're looking for opportunities, but that resolution passed nearly 5 months ago. As far as I'm aware, legislation is not impacted when we're talking about policy shifts and things like that. So what have you put in place so far in response to the resolution in that time?
Well, we've put together a team who is working with Council Executive. We have, as I mentioned, Hamish Bunn and his team working with Council Executive around the restructuring of the RLTP process. So they are really the only things. And I know that we have proposed to Council Executive some aspects of our work that could be transferred earlier than legislation, ahead of legislation. So as I said in my intro, we are leaning into this. I don't think there's been anything settled upon there because it is quite complex.
Thank you, cool. Yeah, I'll just sort of run through a couple because we'll bring it up again in workshop and all that. But, you know, just picking up on the Mayor's point around temporary traffic management, and to me it's not just about number of cones per se, but about costs and about delays. So, look, direct costs are high, and direct costs of rules governing temporary traffic management can make projects last longer, right? Because we're not allowing CCOs to work in corridors, for example. So will you be reviewing rules around when works can happen in the road corridor, and will you commit to trying to force down costs for temporary traffic management?
We are certainly interested in value for money and reducing costs. However, we are as interested, if not more interested, in reducing journey times. And so reducing that disruption. Dean, on behalf of Auckland Transport, sent a letter to the majority of main road corridor users explaining that we no longer were going to approve arterials and town centre work out inside peak hours. So again, from a cost point of view, that potentially might put costs up a little because the length of time that they can work is reduced. However, on arterials and town centres, the expectation is that a number of those would not be in high residential areas, so working through nights would be possible. But again, the feedback, I would say, from the public and from council itself is that if we can reduce disruption on the road corridors in peak hours, that is something that we should do.
Thank you. Just one more on this and then I'll move on to just one other topic. Look, I just wanted to make really clear that reducing journey times and making that the exact focal point, that actually does have a cost. It sounds lovely in theory, but when you have a project that takes 3 months that could take years instead, because of these restrictions, that has a cost on that project, which has direct cost on council and on the ratepayers' bills. So what I mean, it's very hard to quantify, but I'm just wondering in the workshop whether you could prepare some advice around that point, because I think people need to understand how much that is costing the ratepayer.
Yeah, I'm sure we can do some work on that. How accurate or detailed, I'm not sure, because there will be assumptions inherent in it. But I think you could, I would like to think you had the confidence that our team are commercial enough to be able to make good decisions that will weigh up value for money along with traffic disruption. And because we are, I know since the letter has gone out, we have had a lot of requests for exemptions, some of which we're saying yes to.
Thank you so much, and thanks for looking into that. That's really great. I'll follow it up in the workshop. Last one. Look, I'm glad that you've raised, and I think Mark raised, the quantifiable nature around emissions data. I'm just looking at the removal of that target. Look, I've been, as you may know, very critical of past plans which do not give us any assurance about whether emissions are actually going down as a result of the plans or up, right? So there is expertise out there to actually quantify emissions data. Governments do it all the time, for example. I'm wondering if there's capacity and capability in the organisation to do that, and whether if we're saying, look, it needs to be quantifiable, could we get expertise to make it quantifiable so that we could do a target?
My understanding is that, yes, we have that expertise, but Audit New Zealand are going, even if you've got experts, and it's quite good, we don't believe there is enough history and there is enough evidence that your expert data is correct.
I just reiterate, I mean, Kathy Biebman is one of the best in New Zealand who's working on this. She's one of the preeminent thought leaders in New Zealand. It is exactly that point. It's a journey at the moment. Everyone's struggling. So when you say government's provided this data, we're providing the data as well. It's just the auditors are struggling to audit it as we get further up into what we call Scope 2, Scope 3, which is actually the emissions from our suppliers. So to actually capture that data, we have to reach into their business, ask them to provide a whole pile of information and then report on it. And it's as you go further through that chain, it gets very, very difficult. It's a complex, evolving area. All you should take from this is we're committed to it and we're not stepping away from a target.
That's really interesting. So I wasn't aware of that. So the headline there would be that auditing is the issue. Would that be the headline?
It's fair to say auditors are struggling to grapple with this at the moment themselves because they're trying to apply the same lenses they do to financial auditing, like your balance sheet. Even the XRB, so the External Reporting Board in New Zealand's come out and said that they actually think, based on feedback, that auditors should only be providing limited scope assurance on this because the costs of going to a full audit don't outweigh the benefits. We're kind of caught in a bit of a quirk here where, because it's in the SOI, it needs a full audit. So we've got auditors spending a whole pile of time at the moment trying to get to the bottom of how to verify a calculation of information from one of our bus companies, as an example.
That's fascinating. Look, I'll take it to Audit and Risk. It's a very interesting thing. Hey, thank you so much for the answers, team. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Shane. Richard?
Thank you. Just a few questions. First on the bus lanes. So I think 2 years ago we did 8, and then this year we were supposed to do 10, but you're saying that this year we'll end up doing 5, and then we're aiming to do 5 again next year? 5 kilometres?
I think last year was 5, and that was the target. Has the year on now, I'm pretty sure the target's 5. Next year, for the SOI we're discussing today, it's 10.
Okay.
And then I think the year,
This year, the year we're in now, the SOI target is 5 kilometres, and we are on track to at least meet that, possibly slightly exceed that. The proposal in the SOI for next year is to double that to 10 kilometres.
But we have in last few years done definitely more than the 5.
So there's a difference between, let's just not get confused between the number of projects that get delivered and the kilometres that they return back to the network. So there's 2 different things we look at, and this year's metrics include a number of projects and it includes a total kilometre distance. And I think sometimes those 2 things get conflated. So when you talk about 7 I think you are referring potentially, Councillor, to a number of projects delivered.
No, it's 2023 and 4. The SOI said that we had achieved 8 kilometres of bus lane.
I'd need to check.
I could name a few in my own ward that happened that year. So, okay, this is connected to this question. So we don't have an SOI figure on the cycleway kilometres anymore. They used to be 10 a year once we made it up to 17.
Sorry, the SOI currently says 10. So
for cycleways.
Cycleways.
We've cut that out because the government won't fund it anymore.
Quick question, Sean, do we have a deliverable for cycleways?
Yes, we have a deliverable for that. We are still committing to do it. We have removed the measure on the number of cycleways. We still retain our cycle counts measure. We want to be measuring how many people are using them. This was part of our attempt to consolidate the ever-growing number of SOI measures to keep them relevant.
So, I guess with some scepticism, what's the SOI called? A plan for tomorrow?
Preparing for tomorrow, delivering for today.
Yeah. So when we cut and not, in my opinion, not being super ambitious for keeping the bus lanes at 10 kilometres, we don't have any kilometre target for cycleways anymore, which we had at 10s under the last national government and the last government. And then we also have no emissions target, despite, and I'll try and keep it short, Chair, the times that the board and executive have come here, 2021, we'll wait for your climate plan. 2022, we need to do an emissions reduction plan and we'll do it with you. We'll wait for the RLTP, wait for this. And now we're saying...
You got a question on that, Richard?
No, the question is, how when cities all over the world, they're kind of doing bus lanes, cycleways and emissions reduction, is that we're suddenly not doing those things? And I realise the GPS limits that considerably, but is there a way that we can still be ambitious?
Well, we are doing most of that. And as Mark Lang has said, the emissions reduction target is still in the AT work plan, if you like. It's just the SOI because of that audit. We don't want a qualified audit. Now, we could be directed by you guys and girls to go, actually, we want it in. We don't care if you get a qualified audit because we want that number in the SOI. Now, our executive, and I think your council executive recommendation is that's not the way to go, but we still will report quarterly the emissions reduction number. In terms of the cycleways, unfortunately, and as you know, I cycle a lot, the funding for additional cycleways has been severely limited. So we could have in the deliverables a target based on the funding we've got. I don't see that it makes sense to have an ambitious cycleway length target when we know there's not the money there. That's the challenge.
Okay, thank you. And connected to the other
figures around the 23 minutes over 10 kilometres and the efficiency. All the evidence points to you need the cycleways and public transport to do it. How do you see us achieving the other metrics if we don't, and this is feedback from us to the government too, because it doesn't make sense to me, but how do you see us being able to achieve these efficiency targets for the roads without ramping up the other modes?
Can't, is the short answer. And so when we look at our planning to achieve 20 minutes by 2034 is going to require more people in every vehicle. Well, not more people in every, more people on average in vehicles, so more use of public transport. It's going to require more people walking and cycling short distances, and therefore the roads will become freer for those people like tradies that need to use it. So,
But I guess trying to pull all these SOI targets together, how are all of those things true if we aren't or can't invest in all the other stuff? How are you saying we'll reach 20 if we can't? How are we going to get more people in cars or buses or bikes?
The big secret is public transport. That is, if we have a look at the numbers, and again, interesting, we had a session on TERP the other day, that TERP's ambitious target was something like a doubling of public transport from 13 to, is it 26 or 29% of, and walking and cycling was an even bigger increase, but at a much lower level. So the public transport and City Rail link and increase in the rapid transit network for buses, increases in patronage over those areas, catalysed by City Rail link, I'm thinking that will go quite some way to do it. And then what we need to be doing, in my view, is providing more reasons for people to choose to hop on their bike to go to the train station or the bus station, where they think and will have confidence, and coming back to that safety perception that the bike's going to be safe and it'll be there when they get back, so that we can get more people into public. But public transport will be the key, and people choosing not to use their car for very short distances will also be important.
And last question, Chair. Just on, and I have talked about it before, and maybe it's not an SOI measure, but can we have a bit of information on individuals, and I know it's harder with the pay wave, but we have this measure and we've kind of lost Fridays, right? Because people don't use more people are using public transport, but we measure how many trips. So there'll be many people in this room, as we know, that don't come in every day to work like they used to, and that happens across the city too. Are we able to measure somehow the people, even if it's just raw data on HOP and PayWave individual, to show the growth in users? Because we've got anecdotal evidence, but we still get because the trains have been closed and also people catching public transport fewer times. Can we have a bit of a measure on that?
So, Stacey, I'm almost 100% confident that that I know this, that there are more people using public transport than not using it as often.
Yeah, but we don't necessarily report on it. That's right.
Thank you, Chair. You're correct. We have more people, more unique individuals using public transport today than we did in 2019, let's say, in terms of that baseline. So more people are using it, it's just that in terms of frequency. So more people using it, but less often during the week. So I think on average, if we worked out across our whole customer base, it's 1.8 times a week is the current ratio.
Yeah, I guess, Chair, just if we could have of us a few times somehow showing that, so it does show that people are, with the investment, using our public transport, they're just maybe using it less because of post-COVID stuff that's happened.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of unique, Alf?
Kia ora, Helman, thank you. Tēnā korua. And Richard, if you want a cup of coffee after this, my questions, I'll go and get one for you. Look, I've got three easy questions. Firstly, is the core, is health and safety core business of Auckland Transport?
Absolutely.
So with that context, my question is around the orange cones. Aren't they being used so then our community, as well as the workers, will be in a safe environment?
Yes, but there are a lot of examples, I believe, where the system is overdone. So I will give you one example. Last year, Sunday morning, I was on my bicycle just having a look actually at TTM around the city. And I was on Commerce Street, and there was a truck being followed by a large articulated truck with a massive red cross. Sunday morning, very little traffic about, and they were going around picking up temporary speed limit, which I think had been put out for maybe an event. So there were two people in the front truck, and there was one person in the back truck. There was no other traffic, and it was 2 lanes each way. So to me, you could have done that very safely with one person in one truck who drove up behind the traffic, had their orange lights beeping, and picked up the temporary speed limit and put it in his truck. But for whatever reason, and I suspect regulation said that they needed to have all that machinery and 3 people. So that's one example where I don't think it was making it any safer for anybody, because it was would already have been safe.
Like you, I cycle quite a bit, so I know what you mean. This last question of mine is, I've got the recommendation from the 12th of December in regards to the mayoral proposal. So my question is, how are you getting on, obviously in relation with the CEO of Auckland Council around developing the principles, options and the timeframes in regards to the changes that were passed on the 12th of December, please?
The board hasn't had any direct feedback. I'll ask Kirstine to answer that. So Kirstine Jones heads our CCO transition committee, if that's what, I'm not quite sure if that's the exact name, but it's something like that.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Kirstine Jones. Thank you for the question. We're working really well with the council transition team, and we have been, I have been meeting with them on a weekly basis, and we've been working on principles, we've been working on options. There's an options workshop next week. Timeframes, we've been asked for early advice through to the Mayor's office at the end of April, which we will meet that deadline. And if there will be a decision by governing body, I believe, in June. So we'll be working with advice to meet those deadlines. As Richard said, the AT board has been will be given an opportunity to feed into that advice before the decisions come to governing body.
Thank you. I look forward to catching up with you, Richard, on the bike lane. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
That'll be worth watching. Wayne.
I've got a specific question just around improving network productivity. Given that one of those methods is around intelligent signalling, how many intelligent signals are you going to be installing in this next year?
Who can help me with that? Andrew again.
And it'd be nice to know how many we've already got as well.
Through the chair. Thank you, Councillor. That is a very challenging question to answer simply, because we need to define what intelligent signals means, and that definition is not clearly or well understood or even defined. I just want to make the statement first off that all of our traffic signals are connected to an operations system that has intelligence built into it, an adaptive capability. So I would argue that all of our traffic signals currently have a degree of intelligence linked to them. The limitation, the most significant limitation on the intelligence that they have through that operating system comes down to the sensor technology. And that's where we have a real issue at the moment. Those are all in-ground sensors presently, magnetic inductive sensors, and they have severe limitations on detecting things like how long a queue is, or whether there's a bus approaching an intersection, and if you want to prioritise that, if there's an emergency service vehicle approaching an intersection. So we don't have that capability currently, and the problem there comes down to sensor technology. What we are delivering this year, I believe the number, the top of my head, is 65 smarter signal intersections by delivering better sensor technology. It is ultimately the sensor technology that allows the intersections and our operating system to make better informed decisions to prioritise green time to those modes that most needed at that location.
Okay, maybe if I just re-clarify. So I'm not talking about the looped induction in the road. I think you know that. I'm talking about the sort of signals that I see in other cities that are smart, that have got camera recognition, they can recognise the queue length, they can recognise the type of vehicle, pedestrian queuing, cyclists, and they're integrated across intersections. So you actually have smooth flow across a whole range of modes. So I want to know how many of those we're installing. And it'd be nice to know how many we've already got. If we don't have any, well, that's fine. If we're not installing any, fine. I'd just like to know. Well, I'm not happy that we're not doing that, because it is available. So how many are we talking?
Councillor, I think I've done my best to answer your question. We're installing 65 detector systems, so cameras that can pick up the length of queues, that can detect late running buses and prioritise them through intersections, that can detect pedestrians standing at an intersection after they've pushed a button and cancel it if they leave before the phase is called. So I think in terms of what you're asking, the number that we're delivering this year is 65.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the context around that, Mr. Chair, is in the area where I live, congestion's gone up by, I think, 20% in a year. So people are experiencing delays everywhere, and it's escalating. And this is one technique that can be implemented, and it makes a real difference.
Okay, thank you. And I guess it comes into that, the SOI measure that is about, the time that people take to travel around. So, and it sort of mentions that within that SOI. So, Daniel?
With respect to the targets, does the asset condition target include or exclude the road corridor, including the substructure and road resurfacing? Road maintenance is set out in the second target. Can you just clarify that?
Murray? I think the answer is yes, but Murray knows.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? With respect to the asset condition measure target, does that include or exclude road maintenance and the road corridor, including the substructure? Because I note that the road maintenance has its own measure, but can you just clarify if the asset condition measure includes or excludes the corridors? Yeah, the asset condition measure includes the road corridors and the pavement surface. That's a key asset that we're doing condition assessments on a regular and routine basis. Chair, I have to say, in my follow-up question, I'm quite surprised that this is the first time, I think, this morning that this has been interrogated, because this is really crucial. In the footnote for the asset condition, you refer to that the funding from the NLTF continues to be below the depreciation target, which means that what we're looking at is accepting a 20% of the assets that will be in a poor or very poor condition. That's quite high, and we don't have a lot of movement really in relation to road maintenance to be able to address that high number, because if that is not funded, if depreciation is not covering that, what that means is that your asset conditions problem will grow exponentially worse, and you know that.
What's the response to that?
Yeah. So those two lines can be read together. So the road maintenance line, you're seeing an increasing percentage of the network that we're renewing and resurfacing. It's not until we get to the end of the period, around 8%, that we start getting to the, let's call it break-even level, where we're holding the network at a stable level. If we can achieve above 8%, we'll start to see a decline in the deterioration. So the funding envelope that's approved in the RLTP is ramping up year on year for pavement renewals. And that's also supported at central government level through the GPS. And so we're working towards getting to a point where we'll stop seeing deterioration in the network and start to catch up on those backlog renewals. And that will, the tipping point will become the year 28-29.
I note that the sort of ramping up and break even always seems to occur right at the end when the numbers are least reliable, but it never really seems to occur when it's needed, which is pretty well now. So can I ask, with respect to the asset condition, that's an averaged result across the entire network. Do you have a breakdown as to whether that's how that looks sub-regionally within those sub-regional road maintenance contracts, as to whether you are at, above or below 20% in those sub-regional contract areas? Because I think some parts of Auckland are significantly worse than other parts in relation to your asset conditions.
Yeah, we have a lot of detailed data in behind that number. The asset condition is an average across the critical assets. So that includes road pavement as well as public transport assets and structures. We do have detailed breakdown across the regions, and definitely in the particularly peri-urban areas where we're seeing greenfields development and heavy traffic, quarries and trucks and so on roads that were not designed for heavy traffic, we're seeing an increased level of deterioration. So that data is available and can be shared on request.
My final question then, Chair, and maybe you can report this back at the workshop, but I'm assuming that the correct thing for AT now, in response to what you've just said, with that peri-urban development taking place and the consequential impacts on those assets, that you would be looking to do variations within the sub-regional contracts to ensure that not only are you trying to address this, but you're addressing it where it's most critical, given the impact on that particular part of the network.
So we have a asset management plan and out of that comes a 3-year prioritised program of work, which is then prioritised again on an annual basis. And generally the roads that will be renewed and resurfaced are the highest priority at the time. So it's the program is always targeting those areas with the higher level of deterioration. And so, yeah, that's built into the way that we program the work. And the contracts are varied up or down depending on their work program for that year. There's flexibility within those maintenance contracts.
And the challenge from the board to Murray and his team is to try and do more with the same amount of money and find ways of rehabilitating roads that cost less so that we can do more. We have some degree of confidence around funding going out 3 years. So I think while you make the point that the further out you go, the less certainty you have, we're as a board reasonably comfortable that within a couple of years we're going to be pretty close to break even. Now again, things can change, but it doesn't feel catastrophic at this stage.
Can I ask one more question, Chair? Developers don't fund the depreciation and the maintenance of the roads that they're ripping up now. That is funded by you next year or in 2 or 3 years' time, but the network that is being hammered now by the developers who don't pay for that, and there is a consequential effect. I'm wanting to know that you can actually have, not just within the sub-regional contract for that
region, sub-region, that you can prioritise within that contract, but there may well be an adjustment in the neighbouring sub-regional contract to take funding from there to augment the funding that's required there in order to ensure that there is some degree of mitigation against the effect of that development.
So the prioritisation happens across the entire network. It's not just by contract area. And we look at the traffic volumes of the road, the condition of the road, and then on that basis, and there's some other factors come into it, we prioritise which ones will go into that year's program of work. So yeah, we're not constrained by contract area in terms of the prioritisation.
Morris.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a quick additional comment to what Chairman Richard said about some of the costs involved in certain things. I have a video which I will want to share with you of 2 Saturdays ago, the replacing of the speed limit signs on Pakuranga Highway. They basically involve sticking a sticker onto the existing thing, literally a piece of plastic, tear the back off, stick it on. 4 trucks were involved, 1 leading the way up the highway, 2 of them are at the sign with 4 staff, and 1 truck way back further up. Yet the sign was on the inside of the footpath in the park. It didn't even need a truck. You could have walked up the footpath to it from a car park and stuck the 3M sign on with 1 person. So the councillors around this table were always getting quite concerned about the 8 million of unfunded costings it was going to cost us to do the speed limit reduction sign change. I can tell you the cost for just this 1 sign on the video must have been horrendous. 4 trucks and at least 8 staff taking 20 minutes to stick a 3M sticker of 60 onto a sign. I've got the video if anyone doubts it.
You don't have to answer that. It was more about protecting the giggling politicians beside it. Okay, no further questions. Thank you, Richard, for fronting up. You're the first chair of a CCO board to front in this new way of dragging you in front of us and making you present your draft SOI. So well done. And
my pleasure.
Always good to have you, and hope your bicycle's safe. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this? None. Excellent. Okay, we'll put it, all those in favour say aye, and against, carried. In faithful confidence, I don't believe we'll be able to get through the AT update in a judicious and quick period of time. So we'll have lunch now. We'll be back here at 10 past. Sorry? No, not 2 o'clock, but you just do yourself, mate. And 10 past 1.